This day has been given to us beyond anything we could create or earn, whether deserved or undeserved. This day comes to us as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. So come and let us worship with gratitude for this and so many gifts, with humility for our shortcomings, resilience to face the challenges ahead, and let us worship with hope that we will continue to transform our lives and to transform our world. Let's share this next hymn. This is our song. Well, good morning. And welcome to the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge, those joining us online, and for the first time in a couple of months, those joining us in the sanctuary. It is good for all of us to be together in the various ways in which we are together. I'm Reverend Eric Poza, interim minister, joined on our chancel by our music director, Lee Hartman, our director of family ministries, Kathy Smith, who you'll hear from in a moment, and thanks to Robin Mulder for running our check today. Our senior minister and our intern minister, Reverend Nathan Ryans and Leslie Runnels, are not with us today. I wonder where the native Louisianans might be on this Sunday. It is good to be together. We have so much happening in the congregation. Whether this sanctuary is open or not, there has been a lot going on and a lot still coming. Please know that a week from today, we will be gathering in this sanctuary as best we can tell, and we hope to be in here for an extended period of time, but COVID numbers pending. But a week from today, that gathering will be for one of our annual traditions, the blues service here at the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge. So we hope you'll join us for that at 9 o'clock or at 11:30. Both times will be in person in the sanctuary. We also have a couple of other things coming up, a workshop, virtual workshop on Saturday, March 19th with Paula Cole-Jones to discuss the 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism, which you've heard about, many of you heard about in our recent worship services, and this congregation is exploring whether or not to adopt. And on April 3rd, first Sunday in April, In addition to the 2 morning services, we will at 4 p.m. have a special service, an installation service, marking the new senior ministry of Reverend Nathan Ryan and with the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge. So hope you'll join for those. There is so much good that is happening, and it is so good to be together. And with that, I'll ask Kathy Smith to come forward.
Good morning, y'all. It's a beautiful morning. It's Sunday morning before Mardi Gras. Good morning, y'all. Good morning. It is so good to see you all here today. And this month for Family Ministries, we sent home stuff having to do with Mardi Gras, it being Mardi Gras season, right? And one of the things that we sent home were bubbles. Little bottles of bubbles for older kids, big bottles of bubbles for little kids. And this morning's in worship, bubbles aren't just for the little people among us, the short people, the young people. Bubbles are really good for all of us. Sometimes when we are feeling tense or nervous or scared, it helps to be able to focus on our breathing just a little bit, to breathe in and to blow out. And what better to blow out than bubbles? It's also, as we look at the bubbles, we can imagine them being all kinds of things, and our hearts can lift as we are imagining that. And so this morning I've asked Reverend Eric to help us out with a little bit of a bubble meditation. If this works the way I think it's going to, all of y'all will have a chance to have bubbles like right next to you, I hope. There is something truly joyous about that, isn't there? You can go ahead and fill the room with the bubbles if you'd like to, Eric. And as the bubbles drift out over us, I would like you to look at them and to watch them. They are shimmery, they are light, they are beautiful in their own right. They do eventually disappear, and then there are more. And as we watch the bubbles drift out over the congregation today, I'd like to invite you to pick one or two, to watch them drift overhead. And when that one is gone, to choose another. And then I'd like you to choose a bubble and give it a name. Name it something that is bringing you joy or that could bring you joy. Maybe kittens or puppies or stuffed animals, smiles from a friend, a beautiful song, a helpful companion, there are so many things to bring us joy. In the midst of all that there is, let us remember that there are puppies and kittens and stuffed animals and smiles and friends and bubbles. Thank you.
We share with one another in so many ways as we worship together. And once again in person and also virtually, an opportunity to share symbolically that which is on our hearts, which we bring personally with us into this time of worship. In a moment, those who are in the sanctuary, I'll invite you to come forward, lining up along the walls and coming up to take a stone and place it in the chalice to symbolize what is on your heart today. Those at home, invite you to do so in our chat. But some choose to type an asterisk, others will type the name of who their stone represents. I do want to lift up in particular Dick Haymaker, who broke his leg last week and is recovering, and lift up a congratulations to Sandy Hubbard and Pierre Sargent on their engagement. So congratulations to them, and with all that we bring with us, joyful and somber, please come forward and share. And we light the flame in our chalice, symbol of our freely covenanted Unitarian Universalist faith, saying together the words appearing now on the screen: with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love. So I'll say something first to those physically present in the sanctuary, and then to those virtually present on your electronic devices. To those of you here in the sanctuary, welcome back inside. It's good to be together in person. And to those of you worshiping remotely, welcome back online. It is good to be together virtually. Both are equally true, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity for both. It seems fitting to me that here in southern Louisiana, the day that we return to the sanctuary after a couple of months of outdoor service because of high COVID numbers, is the Sunday before Mardi Gras. This season of joy is one that, now that I've lived twice, albeit briefly each time, in southern Louisiana, I've come to recognize and appreciate as something unique to the culture of this place. Having lived in other places, this is a time of celebration unlike any others. And at the risk of being just a tad bit disdainful of other traditions, I normally love pancakes, but they seem so inadequate by themselves to the occasion of this celebration that's coming up on Tuesday. Shrove Tuesday. Anyway, it's a joyful time, and it's a time for expressing an exuberant joy. And though we have different ways of doing so, I know that many have been participants, or at least spectators, in one or more of the many parades that have happened, several in Baton Rouge and more than I can count in New Orleans. And coming to learn as a relative newcomer to southern Louisiana, to learn names like Cru de Vue and Chewbacca's and recognize that they have meaning in a way they wouldn't anywhere else here, has been quite the education for me. And it would be such a good time to focus on joy this Sunday. And yet, it's not just a joyful time, because, as most of us know, 3.5 days ago, war broke out in Ukraine. Attacks by the Russian military continue. Many lives have already been lost, much damage has occurred, and there's not yet any end in sight. There's much that can be said about this time, and I'll say a little bit more about it later in the service. I will note, though, that's not the only sorrowful thing happening this week. I particularly think of the state next door, where extreme transphobic legal opinions have been issued by Texas elected officials that have caused an air of danger for so many families who are trying to live their lives authentically in that state. When we have so much joy and so much pain and struggle held together, it's sometimes hard to know what to do with that tension, with that paradox. But I appreciated something that Kathy Smith did last Sunday, not in the online worship, but the in-person outdoor worship at 11:30. We had shared for the lesson that day. Some of you who were watching would have seen a story being shared, but we couldn't share it in quite the same way, that video, for the outdoor worship. So instead, we heard a familiar passage from the canon of Scripture, Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There is a time for every season under heaven, a time to mourn, a time for joy, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time for war and a time for peace. There are so many tensions we hold in our lives, and that passage reminds me of that, reminds many of us of it. But how do we balance those tensions? How do we live into the paradox of finding joy, as this season calls us to do, in times of war, which we also are now living in? Times of intense pain and despair. Well, it's a complex question, and it's one that will take a bit to unpack. But first, I'm going to invite you, those who are online as well as those in the sanctuary, to join me in this next reading. It's what's known as an antiphonal reading. The formal name, if you're not familiar with that term, is irrelevant. Long story short, what it means is that we're going to have two different sides of the congregation, if you will. So for those of you in your seats, as you're facing me, those who are on your left side, which will be over here, to your left of the center aisle, I'll invite you to read one set of portions of this reading, and those who are on the right side, I'll invite you to read the other set. And rest assured, they're labeled. You'll see at the top corner of each slide that will be shown momentarily, left or right, to indicate. Those who are at home, pick a side. Pick whichever side you feel called to. I would encourage you, if there's more than one of you watching on the same device, you might have one of you choose the left side and the other choose the right side, so that both voices can be shared. And with that, I invite us along with the voice that you'll hear, it's my voice as it happens, recorded, read along with this next reading, which talks about how we need one another.
We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. We need one another in the hour of success when we look for someone to share our triumphs. We need one another in the hour of defeat when, with encouragement, we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us.
Well, let's begin with one of the difficult events this week, the war launched against Ukraine by Russia. Again, as noted, the attack started here in the United States was Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, I believe, there. Attacks in many parts of the country, not just in the two regions in eastern Ukraine that have a larger number of ethnic Russian residents and citizens that have been claimed by Russia, but throughout the country as well, even into the interior, even into the capital city, Kyiv. There has been an incredible amount of destruction, as I noted earlier, and quite a few lives lost, and a citizenry that has been encouraged by the president, Zelensky, to take up arms against the military invading forces. Now, I'll confess that I'm a bit skeptical of an approach to preaching about world events that focuses too much on the socio-political context. I certainly remember the Sunday after the September 11th, 2001 attacks, where the congregation where I worked at the time and many others I heard about later across the country, complaints were raised about sermons that simply offered socio-political analysis of the attack and the situation surrounding it. But there is a little bit of context needed. And I happen to have an oddly unique source for such geopolitical insights. One of my best friends works for the U.S. State Department and shared a couple of bits of advice about how to think about these events that I found striking. I think the one that surprised me the most was, this is coming again from a U.S. State Department official: don't watch American cable or broadcast news for info on this war. Concerns raised about the for-profit nature of news agencies that might strive for ratings and therefore higher advertising rates, higher profits, by sensationalizing events. This U.S. State Department employee instead advised watching international news services, such as the BBC News. But the most sobering thing he shared was that this war that broke out a few days ago is likely to be the first war of the global climate change era. That is to say, as I understand him, this is a war that is intended to secure for Russia set of resources that will be increasingly unavailable to it as climate change continues to devastate our globe. There are, of course, other aspects of this war. It's also one that has an interesting religious facet, which I confess I didn't know about until just a couple of days ago, reading an article by the church history scholar Diana Butler Bass, who pointed out that there is currently a struggle going on within Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And there appears to be a claim or a thrust from Russia, and particularly from its current leader, Putin, to claim control, authority over all of Eastern Orthodoxy, and for the religious resources of that tradition to be used, much as evangelical Christian resources are used here in the United States, to help further political agendas. And yet, a separate branch of the Orthodox Church formed a few years ago in Ukraine and has claimed instead authority over aspects of the religion, including the city of Kyiv, which is a central location in Orthodox history. Well, none of this conflict, for its religious reasons, its socio-political reasons, etc., none of it is joyful. And I certainly understand why many people, I've been tempted to do it myself, might move quickly into a kind of solemnness when such painful events occur. And yet, it's Mardi Gras. So the question's with us. Why be joyful? What role can joy have in a world that's filled with so much suffering? Well, we'll discuss that a little bit later. But first, this hymn of comfort. Let's hear Winds Be Still. And I invite you now to a time of deeper sharing, a time of prayerful sharing, inviting you to reach deep within, reach far beyond yourself to connect with what you know to be sacred. Let us pray. Spirit of life and love, God, whom we know by so many names, mystery beyond all our naming, we come together on this day that is full of complexities, reminded of the importance of joy, and yet knowing so much pain in the world, in neighboring states, and so often in our own lives or those we love. Help us to balance, to navigate the complexities of these, taking seriously the struggle and taking seriously the celebrations that come to us together, often all at once, and help us to know these times to be times of deep humanity, times of connection with others, times where we can accomplish more with one another than we accomplish alone. So may it be for us all. Amen.
Someone put a button in my church mailbox recently with a quote from Alice Walker that says, "Resistance is the secret of joy." When I read that, I immediately thought, yes. And then a few seconds later, I was like, wait, no, I don't think I believe that. What I believe is closer to the reverse, that joy is the secret of resistance, because we need joy in order to keep going. And this is readily apparent in what I experience as a common difference between events planned by individuals or organizations for marginalized communities and those planned by people or groups with dominant identities. Those led by marginalized communities are much more likely to incorporate joy and art and dance. Is there anger and outrage? Yes, of course. But there's more than just that. At events led by those with dominant identities, it's much more likely that there will be only anger and outrage. At best, maybe a song or two. What I think it highlights is that when you don't have the privilege of taking a break from injustice, you don't take a break from joy either. Instead, joy becomes all the more important. Liberation is more of a marathon than a sprint. Outrage without joy threatens to leave us all breathless, far short of the finish line.
That reading was written by and offered by the Reverend Rob Keithan, Unitarian Universalist ministers affiliated with All Souls Unitarian in Washington, D.C. And well, besides being someone I've known for many years, he is also a noted reproductive justice advocate and activist in the Washington, D.C. area. And he offers words that remind me of the problem with my own tendency to simply focus on what's wrong with the world. Because we have, and by we, I mean people who look like me, white people, men, cisgender people, have a set of privileges that allow us the resources, emotional and spiritual resources, to just be kind of somber and morbid for extended periods of time, which can be soul-crushing, but which can be endured with enough privilege. those who are not so privileged to have such access to such, comfort in every moment of their lives, or at least comparatively so, do not have the privilege of not finding joy even in the hard times. And I appreciate that point as we come to the season of Mardi Gras, a season which I confess is not completely for me. I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of parades. Even though I've had the experience of walking through the French Quarter on Fat Tuesday itself and seeing the joy around me. And if I'm completely honest, I might have my own tendencies towards being a bit solemn. And yet I take seriously this reminder of what's problematic with that. And reminders from my colleagues. Leslie, our intern, pointed out to me that even during the World Wars, Mardi Gras was celebrated. Reverend Nathan pointed out that after Katrina and the federal floods in 2006, that Mardi Gras was especially boisterous and defiantly so. And I'm reminded of other communities that have found resistance and joy to go together. I stumbled across something I'd seen before recently on the internet that spoke of a community in France in the early 1940s, the Zazus. This was during the Vichy France government that collaborated with the Nazis and imposed a number of hardships on the French people during World War II. But these young people, who probably took their name from a Cab Calloway song, Zazuzaz, objected and rebelled in the most fun and joyful ways you could imagine. When government decreed that hair should be short, they grew theirs out into high pompadours. When fabric rations were imposed, they chose the most showy and billowy clothes that they could imagine. And when it was required that yellow stars of David be worn on the clothing of Jews, there in France as well as had happened in Germany, the Zazus wore yellow stars on their clothes as well. I'm reminded also of the words of two people who paid some real attention to the importance of joy. They even wrote a book about it 5-6 years ago. The Book of Joy, it was called. And you might not always pay attention to the things that are said by two elderly men, but when those two elderly men are both spiritual leaders in very different traditions, and both from marginalized communities with incredibly harrowing life experiences, such as was the case for these two authors, the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It's worth paying attention to what they have to say. And one of the things in the book, this was from the Dalai Lama, one of my practices comes from an ancient Indian teacher. It said elsewhere that that's Shantideva, noted Hindu religious figure, who taught that when you experience some tragic situation, think about it. If there's no way to overcome the tragedy, then there's no use worrying too much. So I practiced that. It's a remarkable reminder of the importance of holding paradox. And it's why, even in the sorrowful times, it's worth finding joy. So, let's see about shifting into how we can find joy. And I invite us to start with a song that we've heard for a couple of weeks now, and we'll share again. Shall we gather at the river? Well, we do share with one another in so many ways as we worship together. I invite you to share generously in gratitude for all that it means for us to be together virtually and or in person as we prepare to receive the morning's offering here in the sanctuary. The basket soon will be passed. If you're joining us online, you'll see a slide momentarily that will show you the link at which you can give online. And know that you are giving not just for the continued good works of this congregation, but again, we share every Sunday with an organization that resonates with our values, and every Sunday in this month of February we have been and will today share with Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. So please give generously as the offering is now gratefully received. We give thanks for these gifts given generously. In that same book I mentioned, Archbishop Tutu, who just passed 2 months ago at the age of 90, added this key point. The question is not, he said, how do I escape this pain? The question is, how can I use this as something positive? How can I reframe the difficulties of the situation I'm in and find the positive that is in it, even as I'm acknowledging the struggle as well? Well, throughout their book, they go deep into sharing 8 pillars of joy, different qualities, different characteristics or virtues, if you will, that can foster a sense of joy amongst people. And I won't share every one, but I'll note a couple. Humility, trying to look humble and modest to yourself and to those around you. Practicing forgiveness, which frees ourselves from the past. I've often heard it said that forgiveness is letting go of all hope of having a better past. And humorous though it may sound, there's truth to it. Gratitude is another one. Expressing how I am fortunate to be alive and noting how grateful we are for what's around us, because it helps us connect with that for which we are grateful, helps us connect with those for whom we are grateful. Compassion. This, of course, by the Dalai Lama, but certainly agreed with by Archbishop Tutu, a practice of something we want to become, being something we want to become, and engaging with others with the compassion that we might hope to be met with ourselves, and generosity. That noting how filled with joy we all are, we all can be, and that when we acknowledge that generosity, we also are willing to share out of that generous spirit, out of that joyful spirit with generosity. And I lift these up. There are a few others as well, but I lift up these because I'm struck by how each of them has a social component, how while there is individual work to be done in finding joy, the majority of these pillars have social components to them. They're about our relationships with others. And maybe that more than anything is the lesson of today. Yes, there is so much reason to find joy in our world. And yes, there is so much pain in our world. But the other thing that's true about this day is we're together. And we're together in ways we haven't been together in a couple of months, in this congregation especially. And that act of being together as human beings, of coming together in our differences and our similarities and building a community amongst one another that is greater than the sum of our own individual parts, that's joyful work, and it's work that strengthens us to face the challenges and the pains of our lives. And as a person myself who has lived for over a decade in temporary places, staying no more than 2 years in any place, the benefits of grounding in community have become clear to me, frankly, in their absence. And so I'm grateful that we are finding ways to come back together, whether in the sanctuary or not, because when we are in community with one another, we are strengthening one another for those challenges, and we are finding ways to share and spread the joy that is truly part of life. So, with that hope that it may be so for us all, and an amen for it, I invite us to join together joyfully. Our final hymn is When the Saints Go Marching In. Please rise. Joy of being together reminds us that as we go forth from this sacred time, from this and so many sacred places where we have gathered, we go forth knowing ourselves to be blessed, graced with blessings of freedom, of wholeness, and yes, of joy. So, though our worship may now end, our service begins anew. Let us go forth and serve this hurting world in the spirit of love. Thank you all for joining us. Go in peace.